51%. That's where Polymarket just put the odds of the Clarity Act getting signed into law this year. And I need you to sit with that number for a second because 3 weeks ago, it was at 65. That's not a dip. That's a collapse. That's the prediction market looking at everything happening in Washington right now and going, you know what? We genuinely don't know if this gets done. Here's what nobody on your timeline is telling you, though. This isn't stalling because politicians hate crypto. It's stalling because of a specific fight over specific language. And that fight could kill the entire bill inside the next 30 days. I want to walk you through what's actually happening, why it matters more than your XRP chart, and what comes next. Welcome back. If you're new here, this channel is about cutting through the noise, no price predictions, no hype, just what the data and the politics are actually saying. Today, we're going deep on the Clarity Act negotiations because the timeline just got a whole lot tighter than most people realize. Let's get into it. Let me start with something that got almost zero coverage this week. Kristen Smith, the president of the Solana Policy Institute, went on Fox Business with Maria Bartiromo and said negotiations have stalled. Her words, not stalled as in things are slow, stalled as in the two sides are stuck on how certain assets get defined and how consumer protections get written into the bill. Those might sound like small technical details. They are not. Asset definitions in a law like this, that's the ball game. That decides whether XRP, ETH, all of it, whether those assets fall under the SEC or the CFTC. That decides who can touch them, who can trade them, and under what rules. Get that wrong, and you've either written a bill that regulates nothing or one that accidentally puts the whole industry back under Gary Gensler's playbook, just with a new face behind the desk. And here's the part that's actually keeping me up at night. The Senate has changed so much of the original House bill that we're basically talking about two different pieces of legislation at this point. The number being floated around Washington is 33,000 words of text changed between the House version and what the Senate is working with. 33,000 words. The original House bill had 70 Democrats vote yes on it. What the Senate sends back may not even be recognizable to those same Democrats. Representative Dusty Johnson put it plainly, and I respect this guy for being direct. He said, if the Senate sends over a big box of horse manure, we're dead. Game over. That's a sitting congressman on the record. That's not spin. That's him telling you exactly where things stand. The Senate still has to thread the needle through 4 different areas: ethics, reconciliation, agriculture, and consumer protection, all 4. And then, even if they clear all of that, the House has to look at what they've built and say yes. The House does not rubber stamp this. They go back through it. And the House has been waiting on the Senate for a year already. So when you see people posting that the Clarity Act is basically done or that it's just a formality, I want you to know that is not the reality right now. Now, let me talk about why this matters past just the politics. Patrick Witt at the White House said something that I think gets treated as a throwaway line but shouldn't be. He said trillions with a T are sitting on the sidelines right now, waiting on regulatory clarity, not billions, trillions. And that's not a random number. There's a direct mechanism here that most people aren't connecting. Think about what tokenized assets actually represent. Not crypto speculation, not meme coins. We're talking about real-world assets, bonds, equities, real estate, commodities, living on a blockchain. The market for that right now is somewhere around $4 trillion, but the potential addressable market, the derivatives exposure globally, sits at roughly $1.2 quadrillion. Cross-border payment flows run around 150 trillion annually. Daily foreign exchange volume is sitting at about $7.5 trillion every single day. XRP and the XRPL are being built specifically for that kind of throughput, not to compete with Bitcoin as a store of value, not to be a smart contract platform, to be the rails that move value between institutions, between countries, between currencies in seconds at fractions of a cent. But here's the math that matters for the Clarity Act specifically. Right now, there is a risk premium baked into every institutional position in this space. Every compliance team, every legal department, every board of directors that looks at a crypto exposure has to account for regulatory ambiguity. That ambiguity has a cost. It keeps the cautious money out. It forces institutions to cap position sizes. It makes banks think twice about custody arrangements. The moment the Clarity Act passes, that risk premium doesn't slowly bleed out. It evaporates. The legal question gets answered. The SEC knows its lane, the CFTC knows its lane. And the institutions that have been watching from the sideline, the ones who've been signing NDAs, building infrastructure, running pilots in private, they don't need to wait anymore. That's not a prediction. That's just how capital responds to certainty after years of uncertainty. It moves fast. It doesn't announce itself first. And the people who are positioned before the clarity arrives are not the same as the people who try to get in after. So who's actually been doing the work while retail has been watching the price? Let me show you. Ripple's acquisitions over the last 18 months are not the moves of a company waiting around. Hidden Road, Standard Custody. These aren't just business expansions, they're infrastructure layers. Hidden Road alone processes over $1 trillion in annual transaction volume across prime brokerage. That's not a crypto company making a flashy purchase. That's a company building the operating system for institutional finance on blockchain rails. And then look at the ETF side. The XRP spot ETF applications are sitting in front of the SEC right now. Bitwise, 21 shares. Canary Capital. These firms don't file for spot ETFs speculatively. They have relationships, they have clients, they have investors who are telling them, we want regulated exposure. The application is the signal that demand already exists. On the regulatory side, Japan's FSA has already given XRP a different classification than most of its crypto peers. It's treated more like a currency than a speculative asset under Japanese law. That's not a small thing. Japan is one of the most sophisticated financial regulatory environments in the world. When they make that call, the rest of the G20 pays attention. Now, Jamie Dimon, and I'll be fair to him here, has been on record saying the Clarity Act is deregulatory. Kristen Smith directly addressed this, and she's right to push back. The bill creates new regulation for markets that currently have almost none. It creates consumer protections that don't exist right now. It gives law enforcement new tools. It fills gaps. That's not deregulation. That's finally writing the rules. The reason some institutions are worried is not because the rules are too loose. It's because they've built compliance programs around the current chaos and now they have to rebuild. That's their problem, not the industry's. The industry has been asking for rules for a decade. And one more thing from Kristen Smith that I think deserves more attention. Developers got prosecuted under the last administration for writing code that bad actors later misused, not for using the code to do something illegal, for writing it. If you want to know why the top crypto developers are working out of Singapore and Dubai instead of San Francisco, that's a big part of your answer. Here is the actual timeline you need to understand. The Senate goes on recess for the July 4th holiday and comes back on July 6th. They have a sprint, their word, not mine, of meetings next week to try and finalize key details. After they come back from July 4th, they have a short window before August recess hits. And if this bill doesn't get through the Senate before that August window closes, Representative Dusty Johnson was very clear. If the window closes without the passage of clarity, it is really hard to say when it might open back up. Read that again. Not it'll be delayed. Hard to say when it might open back up, because here's what's sitting on the other side of the 2026 midterms if Republicans lose the House. Johnson named it directly. Chairman Maxine Waters on financial services, Chairman Elizabeth Warren on banking, and the leading candidates for the Agricultural Committee chairmanship in a Democratic House all voted against clarity. Every single one. This is not a partisan point. This is math. The composition of Congress in 2027 could make crypto-friendly legislation almost impossible to pass. The window is open now because of specific political circumstances that took years to create. That window does not stay open by default. What passed in the Senate earlier this year, the Genius Act on stablecoins, that's a signal, not a guarantee. The Clarity Act is a different and harder fight. Stablecoins had more consensus. Market structure, asset definitions, consumer protection on digital securities. That's where the real disagreement lives. The sprint is now. It's July. This is the moment. Let's talk about what actually happens to the market when clarity lands. Right now, the institutional money that wants exposure to XRP has two problems. One is the legal ambiguity I already talked about. The second is liquidity. At current prices, a firm moving a meaningful position, say $200 million dopper, creates real price impact. The available liquidity on exchanges doesn't absorb that cleanly. When regulatory clarity arrives and institutional demand spikes, the math on liquidity changes. More capital chasing the same supply doesn't just push price up gradually. It creates gaps. It creates runs. The exchange reserves, the tokens sitting on trading platforms available for retail to buy, are not going to grow fast enough to meet that demand. On-chain data from sources like CryptoQuant already shows exchange reserves trending down. Tokens leaving exchanges and moving to self-custody or cold storage don't come back quickly. An institution locking tokens in a multi-sig vault to serve as collateral or settlement liquidity is not selling those tokens for a 10% gain. They're gone from the open market for a very different time horizon. The people who wait for the Clarity Act news to break before they position, they'll be right about the thesis and wrong about the timing. Not because they were dumb, because that's how every major regulatory unlock in financial history has worked. The risk premium disappears in days, not months. The ones sitting on the other side of that trade are already there. I want to be real with you for a second. I know some of you have been in this space for 3 years. 4 years, I know you've heard regulatory clarity is coming more times than you can count. I know the Clarity Act has been close before and then not close. I know the price action right now is not telling you anything encouraging. Here's what I'd say to that. Being early feels exactly like being wrong, right up until it doesn't. That's not a bumper sticker. That's how asset pricing works. The information gets priced in before most people have the information. And the people who are positioned beforehand, not because they got lucky, but because they did the work and understood the structure. Those are the people who actually capture the move. The stall in negotiations right now is real. The uncertainty is real. The 51% odds on Poly market are not nothing. But what's also real is both parties still want a deal. The White House wants it. The institutional world wants it. Patrick Witt is actively in the room negotiating with Senate leadership right now. This didn't fall apart. It hit a rough week. The comparison to the Telecom Act of 1996 that Dusty Johnson keeps making, I'm doing a full video on that soon. But the short version is the paragraphs in that bill that nobody paid attention to built the modern internet. Most people missed the implications until years later. That's where we are right now. Look, the Clarity Act is not a guaranteed win. The prediction markets are telling you that. The negotiations are telling you that. I'm telling you that. But here's what I know. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 had a few sentences about advanced services that built the modern internet. Almost nobody read them at the time. Nobody understood what those sentences would unlock. And by the time the world caught up, the moment had already passed. The Clarity Act is those sentences for global finance, for tokenization, for the rails that money moves on. The only question is whether Washington gets out of its own way before August, and whether you're positioned for when history stops being theoretical. Stay sharp, stay rational. The window is open, not for long. Comment clarity below if you made it to the end. And please, email your senator. I'll leave the link in the description. It takes 5 minutes.